Before you begin making the purse, you will need the purse base, and I have a tutorial for that. The link is in the description box. So once you get this purse base done, then you can pick up with the purse pattern. And this pattern is a multiple of 3. And so you need your base row to be a multiple of 3. And if you follow that tutorial, then that will be the exact number that you need, because that gives you 90 stitches around. And so just follow that purse base tutorial exactly as is, and you will be able to pick up right here at the pattern. And this is my long tail, and I explained in that tutorial how to do the tail. And we're going to use a 4.5 millimeter hook to do the purse body. I'm going to hold on to my tail with one of my fingers so that it doesn't come loose until I get the first stitch in, and then you can let go of it at that point. We are going to be using the waistcoat stitch for this, and sometimes that is also called the knit-like stitch or the flat single crochet. And to do that, you insert your hook in the V of your single crochet. So instead of going in between the front and back loop, you go right into the middle of the V stitch. So we're going to do 2 single crochets. And then we're going to go back to the first single crochet that we did and insert your hook into that single crochet. Pull your yarn through. You have 2 loops on your hook. Now go to the 3rd stitch, still going into that V spot. Pull your yarn through. Now pull your yarn through the first loop. You have 2 loops, yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops. And that is how you get your crossover. So you're crossing over the first 2 single crochets and then finishing it in the 3rd. And you just repeat that pattern. So do another single crochet. Make sure you're going into the V of the single crochet before, like a waistcoat stitch. And then do another single crochet. And then insert your hook back into the first stitch. So you're backing up 2 stitches. Yarn over. Go through the 3rd stitch. So this is just the next one. Yarn over, pull through, go through your first loop, and then yarn over and pull through your last 2 loops. And this is the reason that you need a multiple of 3, because when you get to the end of the row, when you complete your last set of 3, when you do that crossover and insert, it should be in the last stitch in the row. When you get to the end of each row and you're doing the last of your 3-stitch pattern, so you've got your 2 single crochets, you're still using your working yarn, but we're going to use the tail to finish the row. So for the 3rd stitch in your pattern, you still use your working yarn all the way until the very last yarn over. So when you get to the 3rd stitch, yarn over, pull through, go through the first loop. When you have 2 loops on your hook, drop your working yarn, grab your tail, pull your tail through all the way both of the loops, keep pulling your yarn all the way through, and then grab your working yarn and tighten up your stitches to where it's level, so everything is nice and tight, just as tight as the ones next to it. And then go to the first stitch in the row, come in from the back and grab the loop, grab the tail, pull your tail through, and then go to your last stitch, put your hook in from the back, pull your tail through all the way, and now you're going to take your working yarn and your tail and you're going to pull everything until everything looks like it's the same size stitches and all your loops are nice and flat. And that is how you're going to end every row. You should have enough tail to go all the way through until your spool of yarn runs out. Make sure when you start each row and you do your first stitch, make sure that you're going back to your working yarn and you're not using your tail. So when you start each row, make sure that your first stitch is in the correct place so that your pattern lines up the way it's supposed to. So I'm going to show you where I start each row. Keeping your tail out of the way, hold the tail down with the finger so that it doesn't get too loose while you're starting this next row. And then once you get a couple of stitches in, you can let go of the tail. Your 3-stitch pattern is going to begin in the 3rd stitch of the pattern in the previous row. So each time you start a new row, your first stitch needs to be in the 3rd stitch of the pattern from the previous row. This is what gives the pattern a staggered look instead of lining up in vertical rows. So do your first single crochet, still hold on to your tail so that your loops do not become too loose. So that's your first single crochet, and you can see where that came from, that 3rd stitch in the previous row, and then do your second single crochet, and then your 3rd stitch is the crossover. And that will put you back to start your 3-stitch pattern again. So you can see where the first stitch starts in each row should be right there where that crossover 3rd stitch in the pattern was from the previous row. So just pick that spot that's closest to where your tail is and that is where each row is going to start. And now you're just going to continue doing your 3-stitch pattern, the 2 single crochets, and the 3rd stitch being the crossover. And that's it. You just do that every row. Use your tail to close up each row and then begin your new row in that 3rd stitch, the one that's closest to the tail area, so that your tail is close by for reclosing the next row. And then just keep going until you get your purse the height that you want. I've gotten the purse to about 6 inches tall at this point, and I would like it to be taller than that, although I am out of yarn. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my 2nd skein of yarn so that I can go taller. You do have the option of tying the 2 threads together, and I'll show you how you can do that. You make a knot on one side, then make a knot on the other side. And then pull both sides so your knot meets together, and that gives it a nice tight edge, and then you can cut the excess off of that. If you do this option, you are going to have a little knot on the inside of your bag, so if you don't mind that, this is an option that you can use. However, this is not the option that I'm going to use. I don't want to have a knot on the inside because sometimes it's really hard to make sure that the knot is on the inside and not the outside. So what I'm going to do is I am going to just, I'm going to cut this off since I'm not going to use the knot option. And then I'm going to just work in the new strand, and to do that you need to just crochet until you have a little bit of a tail left, and now that I have just a little bit left, I'm going to use that and I'm going to work that in. Make sure you keep the tail that you are closing your rows with out of the way and you're not using that. And then you grab your new skein of yarn, leave another small tail, and then when you start crocheting again, you grab your new yarn and start using that. Hold your tails nice and tight. And then now you're going to continue to crochet, but you're going to have 2 tails that you need to hold on to next to your project so that you can work them in while you're crocheting. And you can cut them down and make them a little bit shorter, but you don't want them to be so short that it could come unraveled. So I just hold my tails right there and I hold on to them so they don't get loose. so that they're snug inside the stitches. And I just hold them while I crochet, and that way you don't have any knots inside your purse. If you're going to line your purse with fabric, you may not care about the knot, and that's probably a quicker way to do it. So I just like to keep crocheting until I feel like those tails are in there nice and tight, and then you can cut them off and make them shorter if you want to. And now I'm gonna put the D-rings in. I always add the D-rings when I get within 2 rows of the height that I want. And I do that because I like to have 2 rows of stitches on top of the D-ring. It gives it a little extra stability so that the D-ring doesn't get stretched out around the stitches. And so just go ahead and pick whatever D-ring color you want. I pick this color because it matches the hardware on my strap, and it comes in a lot of different colors, so just pick whatever color matches your strap. So next you need to figure out where your D-rings are going to go. You need to figure out what 4 stitches are going to be in the D-ring. And I just put the bag straight, and then I press the 2 sides together so that I can see where the side is, like the perfect side. So you just look, and I like to use 4 stitches. 4 stitches will make each side lay flat. If you do 3 stitches, then with this particular cording, it will not lay flat. So you need the 4 stitches because there's 2 stitches right in the curve. So you need those 2 stitches in the curve, and then you need 1 stitch on each side to make everything line up level. So once you figure out which 4 stitches your D-ring is going to go in, then you can go ahead and put a stitch marker so that when you're crocheting down, you know when to grab the D-ring and start crocheting over it. And now you're just going to crochet over till you get to the stitch marker. And once you get to your stitch marker, take that out, grab your D-ring, hold your D-ring, insert your hook on the inside of the D-ring, and then go into your stitch. Now we're going to do 4 stitches, but we have a 3-stitch pattern. So go ahead and do the 3-stitch pattern. And then do the first single crochet in the next stitch. And then now you're going to need to make sure that you're keeping that D-ring out of the way so you don't get an extra stitch inside of it. And when you do your crossover, you need to make sure that you pull the D-ring up and you're doing your crossover underneath the D-ring, so that when you're finished, your D-ring can freely move with those 4 stitches and that crossover stitch isn't locked in. And then you need to go and put the D-ring in on the other side. Make sure that you mark your stitches. And now I'm at the end of that row and I have both D-rings in, and I like to do one more row before I do my top stitch, because I like to have another row of stitches on top of the stitches that are in the D-ring. It just gives it some more stability. Next row, I'm back over to where the D-rings are, so just do your stitches like normal. It may be a little bit more difficult to insert your hook into that waistcoat spot because that D-ring metal is in the way, but you can do it, and it needs to still go into that spot so that the pattern looks correct. And now just continue to crochet and do the same thing on the top of the other D-ring on the other side until you get to the end of the row. And now I've got both D-rings in. I am at the end of the row, and I'm going to put a top stitch, which is just a slip stitch around the edge. And this time we're not going into the V spot like we did with the waistcoat. We're going to just go into the front and back loop of the stitch like a regular single crochet would do, but we're just going to do a slip stitch. So insert between the front and the back loop. Hold that tail that you closed the row with so it doesn't get loose. Grab your working yarn and pull through. And now go to the next stitch and do a slip stitch. Grab that tail and make sure you pull it tightly so it doesn't come loose. And do a slip stitch all the way around the top. And now I'm coming around the end of the slip stitch row. And I'm going to use the tail to close it like I did all the other rows. now you're going to cut your yarn. And now when you cut the yarn, you're going to have two tails, and we will weave the tails in with a crochet needle into the inside of the purse. And then weave the other tail in, and then cut the excess off. And then once you get it all finished, you may need to go on the inside and push the walls to get everything shaped just right, because while crocheting, sometimes the body of the purse gets a little misshapen by the way you're holding and pulling on it to do all of these things. So just go ahead and shape it. It shapes pretty easily. And then you can line it with some fabric if you want to. That's optional, but a lot of times I do line my purses with fabric. But I am not good at sewing, so I'm definitely not going to demonstrate that, because sewing is not something that I do well. Also, you can complete your purse at this point and put your strap on. If you don't mind the purse being open, I am going to sew in some flaps. This is actually the first time I'm going to do a long flap. I did do a short flap on this purse, and the reason I like doing the flaps is because then you can put these snaps on there that don't have to be sewed in, because I do not like to hand sew. So these you just push through the yarn and then pull the tabs back, and that's it. It's very simple, and I can actually crochet quicker than I can hand sew. So that is the reason that I prefer to crochet these flaps in. But you can choose to buy the snaps that sew in if you would rather do that. You just have to have thread that is the exact same color as the outside of your bag. Otherwise, you're going to be able to see where your snaps are. So I am going to have this flap be pretty close to D-ring to D-ring. The other flap that I made that was shorter, it does okay. It holds the purse mostly closed, but it is, you know, open for things to fall out. But it's also open that you can, you know, slip stuff in there pretty easily too. But I'm going to try this one with a much longer, so that the majority of the purse is closed in. So I'm basically going to hold it here by the D-rings and see where I want the flap to start. And I'm going to go about 2 stitches over from where the D-ring is. And we're going to go through the front and the back loop on the top of the purse. So make sure you're not going into the loops where the slip stitch is. So we're going to go on the other side of the slip stitch, and that way the slip stitch still shows on the front of the purse. Leave yourself a tail that you're going to work in. And then grab your yarn, pull through, and make a chain to have your first single crochet. and then just single crochet in every stitch. And I'm going to work the tail in at the same time. So just hold your tail there. And I'm going to do a single crochet all the way until I get to where I have 2 stitches on the other side before the D-ring. Once you get to the end where there are 2 stitches left, so that it's the same on both sides, you just chain 1 and turn and go back the other way. Again, you're going to do a single crochet in every stitch all the way across. So this is my tail that's kind of sticking out, so I'm going to cut that off. That's where I worked it in. I was able to work it all the way across. And just continue till you get to the end of the row. You want to keep crocheting rows until you have enough width so that your snap fits in with a little bit of space on both sides. You want to be able to fold your flap in with your snap and it not show. So I think I'm going to go one more row on mine so that it's a little bit further away from the top edge. So now I have completed 6 rows, and I believe that is the perfect amount for the snap that I have. Now you need to tie off your yarn. So I'm going to cut the yarn and I'm going to make a knot. And I like to make another little knot on the side and then weave in the tail on the inside of the flap so that it won't show. And I'm going to put 2 snaps on each side. And then you're going to repeat that process on the other side, and when you get that flap done, you just need to put your other side of the snap on there. And now I have the other flap done, so I'm going to go ahead and install the other snap. You want to make sure that the 2 sides are lined up. So I'm going to fold in both of the flaps and make sure that the flaps are straight and fold it in exactly like I want them to be. And then take the other side of the snap, put it in there, and then close up your purse to line it up. So you go ahead and just act like you're closing your purse and then unsnap, trying to do it with the prongs still in the yarn so you know where you want it to be. And that's it. You may need to tuck the little corners in to get it to lay flat. And then just attach your strap and you're ready to go.